To understand the challenge on data is to understand why it doesn't exist. And I think it's because there are big parts of the continent that are undersurveyed and misunderstood or not understood at all. Hi, I'm Carine, representing Local Planet Africa, really powered by Curiosity Africa. And I'm here to tell Arnaud a little bit about Africa.
So I'm Arnaud from Local Planet Middle East, powered by Tonic International, and I am the chairman of Local Planet Middle East and Africa. I hear you are in a lot of different markets, and that Africa is not just one country, apparently.
Definitely. I think the biggest misconception about Africa is that it's quite homogeneous and it's quite similar. And if you're in East Africa, it's just Africa. We often get Africa briefs where actually it's 54 countries and very diverse country-wise and language-wise, and the consumer is quite different. So our business has 35 offices in Africa, all self-owned and self-funded. And the expertise really is around being able to give a strong local nuance to the different markets and give it a local voice and a local relevance.
We operate out of Dubai mostly. We have partners in various markets across the Middle East, but we can really develop communication across the Middle East that is quite homogeneous and will work. I think at the ground level it changes a bit, but the overarching communication and the strategies we develop are a lot more homogeneous, I think, in our markets, even though there's big differences between Lebanon and Saudi or Egypt and Dubai.
I think that in Africa there are regions that are similar, but certainly because of geopolitical politics, language differences, cultural differences, religious differences. So we have to be really sensitive and make sure that we consider that. So regional communication is possible, I guess, but definitely not recommended. It really has to be, in most cases, a sort of a country-by-country approach. And one of the biggest mistakes we see brands making is trying to do exactly that, trying to save the money and do a regional campaign where even Tanzania and Kenya, who border each other, have very different takes on just language and religion. So I think getting that right is a key deliverable for brands who want to really break it into Africa.
But it's always an interesting challenge, I find, because you can develop global campaigns that do resonate with people at a global level. So why can't you do a campaign that resonates across Africa?
I think that when it comes to a consumer good, and the more expensive it becomes, obviously the more consideration goes into it. But I think things like local language, when we're trying to persuade, especially behavioral change campaigns, or if it persuades a mother to buy a product for a child, I think local language especially is important. Global campaigns that show the wrong tonality becomes a challenge. I think that small things, like certain markets we can't show a female in a campaign. In certain markets the decision in the home gets made by a mom. In other markets the dad makes a decision. So I think like those sort of tonalities, if we're trying to convince a consumer to spend, they become really important.
We face an issue here in this part, which is I've worked in many different countries before. I've never seen this, but I think you face the same problem, is the lack of reliable data, particularly when we start looking at consumer data, really understanding who our audience is, even market share for our clients, what the competitive set really is. And then when we start getting into media, what's media consumption, who is actually watching what, who is reading what, it starts getting very gray area. Everybody is using data that, at least we have some data, but a lot of us know that it's convention, that's not really completely reliable. So I think you're facing similar, if not worse, issues in your markets.
A bigger challenge is Africa is not just the data doesn't exist, but also people creating data, which, like you say, you should question what the source of the data is, who's funding it. To understand the challenge on data is to understand why it doesn't exist. And I think it's because there are big parts of the continent that are undersurveyed and misunderstood or not understood at all. But also, if we're only spending sort of 2% of media budgets in Africa, there's no real push to push for that data to exist.
It's expensive.
Exactly, it's expensive, and really brands are the businesses that fund that data. I think what we're definitely seeing is, with a big push from the global brands to spend more money on digital, they're trying to, and we're obviously it's a highly measured, highly performance-driven environment. We're definitely seeing more brands saying we want the media data when it comes to radio and TV, because brands understand the role of TV, radio, and out of home in Africa, which is very, very important still. We're dealing with a digital consumption of between 5 and 10% in very developed markets. It's only really Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, parts of Nigeria that's got high digital consumption, and maybe Morocco. But the rest of the continent is pretty low on digital consumption. So if you're spending the vast majority of your budget there, which is where we're seeing big global brands go, you're definitely going to miss a big part of the audience. I think that, and I think this really where the partnership that we have as Curiosity Africa comes into play. We rely heavily on the technology that Curiosity bring to the table, and our strong local network of agencies and access to data in the markets, or at least the possibility to collect it and sample it. I think that's where the magic comes, and that's why we're perfectly positioned for where Africa is right now. Is if we're in a world that brands are saying we want to measure more, we want to know more, we want to be highly accountable for our budgets, which I don't think has ever not been the case, but I think really in Africa the emphasis is there now. It would be virtually impossible to do it without partners that understand the context to get the data, how to use the data, and then the technology to be able to integrate that into planning.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting as well. This we see a lot more international brands coming into the Middle East, probably because it's a growing region and they need to show some growth. And a lot of these brands don't understand the lack of data. We're now at a level where we can change the conversation thanks to Curiosity and that kind of tools. We're really changing the conversation. So we're looking at gathering data that is not necessarily just media data, that can be commercial, sales, promotions, seasons, etc., etc. So we feed a lot of data, and then we develop predictive models for the campaigns and what will really affect the effectiveness of a campaign. And that I find is really exciting, and that changes the conversation. And we are currently talking to a couple of clients about this that really do see the value to just forego the existing supposedly data, change completely the conversation and look at different models. Because we don't have that legacy issue, we can really, I think there's a real opportunity, I think across our region, I think for Middle East and Africa to really change the conversation for our clients and really be more transparent, be more effective, really see where the dollar is going and how effective it is for their bottom line at the end of the day. I think that's a very interesting conversation to have.
I think also, Arnaud, is like even if we had the data, do we have the people that can have that conversation with the clients? I think that in Africa we have sort of like a double whammy, is that we don't have the data. We have a really big skill shortage. The average sort of media director in an agency is in the early 30s. So life experience, commercial understanding of a client's objectives, those become conversations that can be quite challenging for them to have.
Yeah, the client side as well.
Exactly. So
people are promoted usually from sales. They end up in a marketing position without any real understanding of what marketing is all about. And suddenly we start having these conversations and we realize half the time needs to be spent educating them as to what the conversation is about first and what the data is about first. And that's also one of the changes that I've seen in the last 2-3 years, really since post-COVID, where these brands are coming here, they bring with them a different level of marketing expertise. Not all of them, but at least we have that conversation with some of them today, where the clients really do understand what is it that they're looking for, what they want, and then we can have that conversation. I find that probably 5 years ago would have been very, very difficult to have. We always say, actually, from a media perspective, we spend half our time educating clients. That really, and half being nice.
I think it's also like if you have a skills gap between both your client and your teams are young and inexperienced, it's also like ultimately we have to understand we have a commercial role to play. Is to say to the client, like, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? I know that you want to spend $50,000 on the summer campaign, but what are you trying to do with the summer campaign?
Yeah.
What are you actually trying to do as a business? And I'm not sure that conversation is happening as often as it should, and in enough detail as it should. Even on the client side, they have budgets, they have objectives. What are you actually trying to do as a business? Because otherwise what we're doing is we're chasing quarter-on-quarter campaigns and quarter-on-quarter spends, and actually not building like long-term value with clients. So we're seeing the best campaign deliverables, sort of like the best brand growth in clients who are really ambitious and who want to invest in a long-term relationship and a long-term campaign, where they're saying, okay, let us understand the context. Let's take the time to understand and then build and be clear on what those objectives are, rather than $50,000 on the summer campaign. Give us as many leads as you can. But the brand has got no relevance to the audience. They don't understand what the audience connects to it, which I don't think is unlike any other market. But I think in our markets particularly, it becomes...
Yeah, we start always with what we call the OMG meeting, which is not oh my God, but it's the find out the objectives of the client, how they're going to measure those, and what will be the gain after that. And very often then you start changing the conversation. For starters, if they tell you they have $50,000, that's good. We have clients that come to us and say, we want a summer campaign. Tell us how much it will cost.
Exactly.
So with the understanding of the objectives, what is it we're trying to achieve? Is it, which part of the funnel are we talking about? How are we going to measure these objectives and how do we achieve them? And what will be the gain in the end? Are we gaining market share? We're gaining... Having that very clear conversation and sitting down very often opens the eyes of the client to, oh yes, okay, so let's sit down and let's think about this for a second. And that we find really allows us to have a more adult conversation with a client that in the end knows what their business needs to get. We just need to change that from just being a supplier of here's your $50,000, now go and get me leads, to, okay, what is your business problem? How do we help you?
And I think that the understanding the data problem is again only a part of it. So we're trying to really play an important part as an agency is to say and because it's scale. So the one big advantage is we have scale. So data, even if it does exist, is super expensive in Africa. And because of our scale, we have access to a lot of that data, and we've already acquired and continue to acquire it. So on the one side, you have some of the input that the client needs to make those decisions, because very often the client doesn't have the context. So the ability to say, these are your competitors, this is what they're doing. Where are you wanting to play? That's the kind of information we can give clients which they didn't necessarily have before. And if they had it not in such a comprehensive nature, where you can look at sort of like-for-like market comparisons. Okay, well, we're doing really well in Nigeria, but we have aspirations for Kenya. Okay, well, how does it look like-for-like?
Well, Carine, thank you very much. I think I'm really excited. I've been more than 20 years in the Middle East. So really looking forward to the coming years and powering local planet Middle East and Africa together.
Thank you. It was really nice meeting you and really excited to work with you.